I hope it's okay that I stand. Sitting, I have to move around.
Sure. Do we need to close the door just so we can hear a little bit better?
Thank you.
And is it going to be loaded here?
And
it's going to be loaded everywhere.
And just so you know, before you begin, we do have one counselor on Zoom as well.
On Zoom?
Yeah. So he will not see you.
He sees you there,
He will see
so
you.
he'll just follow you.
Okay.
It is right by that screen.
This one.
And if it doesn't work, I can.
Aha, there we are. All right. Are we good? All right, good evening, council, and I think maybe department head staff. That's my guess. Through years and years of doing city council meetings in Redmond, I figure the people who are left in the audience are probably department heads. So that's just the way it goes. Tomorrow we're going to do this training with staff, so we're going to go a little bit deeper. But we do like to do a version for our elected officials because elected officials are obviously part of our organization and represent the city, and therefore when we are acting in capacity in our role, the behaviors that we do as acting in capacity of our role obviously can have an effect, especially when it comes to topics such as this, which is harassment, discrimination, and we're going to talk a little bit about unconscious bias. So I like to call it red light, yellow light, green light. Oops. Where?
It's down below. You just want to click off.
There we go. Okay, so red light, yellow light, green light. Red light is the illegal discrimination, and yellow light is kind of where most of us live every day. Kind of, is it okay? Is it not okay? It's just kind of how I view the world. So is anything wrong with what I'm saying? And then green light, of course, is how we would like people to act while we are in the workforce. Okay, so we have legal reasons for being trained, right? The organization, the City of North Bend, as an organization, is legally responsible for the acts of our staff, our coworkers, our elected officials when we're working on behalf of the city. And when we wear our hat as an elected official, it's pretty hard in the community to take the hat off, right? I mean, the community elected you, and so the community, when they look at you, when they hear you speaking, it's pretty hard to separate being that counselor than being just the citizen. Okay, so we are responsible for the actions. What is happening? What are we saying? What are we talking about? So I'd like to talk a little bit about today's workforce, or really just us as unique individuals today. We are all different. I really don't know where I'm clicking.
Just let me know.
Okay, all right. So I want to use the word diversity in a different way, kind of an alternative definition. Diversity is who we are as a unique individual, right? Where you were born. Were you born here in in North Bend or in Coos County? Were you born in Oregon at all? I'm an Oregonian. I'm a multi-generation Oregonian. Were we born, maybe not in Oregon at all. Maybe we're from the Midwest or back east or down south. So where were we raised? When were we raised? Which generation are we from? We talk a lot about generational training, right? Are you a baby boomer or a Gen X or a millennial or a Gen Z? So the period of time that we were raised has a huge influence on how we see the world, right? Because our experiences. And then were we in a small town, big city? So again, what were the influences that raised us? How were we raised? Rich, poor, middle class, 2 parents, 1 parent? Was religion important? Or were you the family that went to church every Sunday or not? So all of these components have helped form your view on the world, on just about everything, right? We're going to talk about conscious and unconscious bias in a little bit. So who we are as that unique individual is who comes to work every day at City of North Bend if you're an employee, or wherever you work as counselors or retired or whatever you do in your life. You bring yourself to the role. You bring yourself to the role of city councilor. And none of us are the same, right? Because we were all raised a little bit different. Okay. So quickly, the role of the city council. Go ahead. What is the role of the city council? Well, you, as city council, your role is to manage the city manager. That is your employee, the city manager, right? And as a member of the city council, you should be familiar with policies that, of course, were established by the council as it relates to the work that the city council or the city manager should do. So the city manager's authority, okay? Your job is to review the performance of the city manager, okay? And you are chartered with maintaining a relationship with the city manager, okay? And of course, then your job also is to follow the city charter. So staff works through the city manager reports to city council. If city council have questions about staff, it goes through the city manager goes back and talks to staff, right? So especially when we're in smaller communities where everybody maybe knows everybody grew up together, you know, and we already have relationships long before people became city council members, it's sometimes kind of hard not to just go directly to the person that we want to go talk to, right? Directly, because it's much easier. But once we put that hat on as that city councilor, we have to remember that we have power. We have power in our title. We have power by being a city council member. Okay, so all of a sudden, your role has changed. Your role has changed with members of staff. Maybe that were your neighbor or your friends before. Once you become that city councilor, that hat has changed. And sometimes that's a really hard thing to kind of think about. Because it's like, oh, I've known this person my whole life. Maybe I went to school with this person, or you know, we go to church with this person, or this person, you know, our kids go to school, whatever. And, you know, we're just talking. You know, we're just talking about things. Well, when we're talking about city business, we have to remember our role. Our role is to work as a unit, as a city council unit, and to remember what our processes are. Okay, next slide. So let's dive into red light behavior. And this is that illegal discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Next slide. So very quickly, I'm not going to go in too much depth here. I'll go much deeper when I talk to staff. But basically, we have both Oregon and federal discrimination categories. For many in the Oregon, the federal, they are the same. Oregon has a few more. But basically, we are all protected as unique individuals by our race, by our religion, by the color of our skin, by our national origin, which is where our families came from, okay? Our age, if you're female, pregnancy has quite a bit of protection, especially job protection. We are protected by our sex, our sexual orientation, our gender. So these are all protected classes. Next slide. So you can see this is really hard to read. And the reason why it's hard to read is to show you just how many protected classes are out there. So there's quite a few, okay? And so managers especially say, well, if I can't read them all, how do I know if I am doing something wrong? Well, if as good managers and good stewards of our departments, if we're always treating an employee, okay, with dignity, respect, and following personnel policy and rules, okay, we are going to be in a much better position from crossing the line into treating an individual in a potential discriminatory way, okay? So we have all of these protections, and an employer may not act against an employee based on their race, their religion, their national origin, their sexual orientation, etc. When we act in that behalf, we may be crossing the line into discrimination. So, next slide. So, quickly, what is unlawful discrimination? Well, it's to treat someone different because of one of those protected classes, okay? It can be harassment, it can be sexual harassment, it can be retaliation. So let's talk just quickly about some of this. How can this happen? As you see from this little slide, it can happen multiple ways. An employee can harass an employee, okay? A member of the public can harass an employee. An elected official can harass an employee can harass, supervisors can harass employees or lower level staff, members that they manage. So it happens in many different ways. But depending on your role, depends on how we handle the situation, right? So if it's staff, we of course have a potential employment claim, okay? If the public is harassing you, the city council, you're not employees. So you have a completely different avenue that you go through, all right? But if a member of the public body harasses an employee, discriminates against an employee, now we're back to employment, okay? Because we're looking at what is happening to the employee. So we follow that relationship when we are looking at what kind of claims happen, okay? So next slide. Next slide. Oh, we already did these. So what's a hostile work environment? Why don't you go ahead and just load this slide up. So there you go. So the funny thing about hostile work environment is this is a very, very common phrase that people use. When people are often in a situation that is uncomfortable for them, they sometimes say, I'm working in a hostile work environment. Or if they have a boss who's more like a bully, maybe they have a boss that just yells all the time or is grumpy all the time, comes in and slams door. Really bad environment to work in, but that's not necessarily hostile. That's just a really bad work environment because nothing illegal is going on. Slamming a door is not illegal. Again, probably an environment I don't want to work in because it's very uncomfortable, okay? But it's not hostile. In order for it to be a hostile work environment, something illegal has to be going on. So the law says, look, we're not a civility code. We know sometimes things happen at work, but what we're really looking for is the conduct so objectively offensive that it has altered the working environment for the employee, okay? That's what we're looking at. Next slide. The conduct also that is going on has to be substantial and pervasive. So it has to happen more than one time. If somebody one time says an inappropriate joke, okay, as an employer, we're going to discipline that employee for saying that inappropriate joke. But one joke one time probably is not going to create a hostile work environment for the employee, right? But definitely under our policies and under North Bend's policies, it's not okay. So we would certainly discipline that employee for saying that joke, but it's probably not going to rise to the legal level of a hostile work environment, okay? So what we have to remember is, again, because there's not a civility code, here's the problem with this. An employee says an inappropriate joke, they get away with it. They say another inappropriate joke, they get away with it. When is enough enough? When does it cross the line into a hostile work environment? The problem is, it's usually in the eye of the receiver. It's the person that the conduct is happening to. They're the one that's usually going to decide when enough is enough, okay? So if we don't tackle inappropriate conduct right when it happens, it might get away from us, and then, again, if it happens pervasively, severely, keeps going, now we're like, hey, now we have a hostile work environment because this keeps happening to me, and it has affected my work environment, okay? So racial harassment, this is using derogatory names, ethnic slurs, jokes, talking about people's ethnicity kind of in a bucket, like saying, well, let me give you an example. I worked with a public works supervisor or an HR person whose public works supervisor came into her because she was hiring some temporaries for the seasonal, and he said, hey, you know, hire some people who are Hispanic. They're really, really good at maintenance and lawn care. I mean, they're really good at it. They'll do the work. Okay, that person may not have thought he was saying anything wrong or illegal, but again, it's putting a cultural and ethnic group in a box and saying, oh, Hispanics are really good at lawn care. Okay, so we have to be careful when we use verbiage that we are not putting people in a bucket and talking about a different ethnicity or any ethnicity in a kind of a very general way, okay? And again, I go back to how we were raised, when we were raised, because again, some people might go, well, what's wrong with what I just said? You know, I mean, I wasn't saying anything rude. Somebody might say it's true, you know? Everybody in my neighborhood who does lawn care are Hispanic, so what's wrong with what I just said, okay? So we have to make sure we're not stereotyping, okay? When it comes to jokes, I like to tell especially staff that if the joke is so funny, you're going to have no problem coming to HR or to the city manager or to your boss to share that joke, okay? If you tell the joke because you want a reaction, which is what some people like to do, some people think they're the funny person, right, on staff, then the joke's probably inappropriate. And it's probably a joke that we don't want to be bringing to work. Okay, next slide. I want to talk quickly about sexual orientation harassment. So, sexual orientation has actually been a protected class in the state of Oregon since 2008. So it's not a new protection on the books. It's been around since 2008 on Oregon books, okay? And all this means is that you are protected by your orientation, your sexual orientation, whether that be gay, straight, bisexual, pansexual, whatever your sexual orientation is, okay? So what is sexual orientation? It simply means who you are sexually or emotionally attracted to, okay? And for some people, that can be more than one category, okay? So that's sexual orientation. How do we harass someone? Well, maybe we harass someone, maybe we make jokes, maybe we are being funny, we think we're being funny by making comments about somebody's mannerisms or their voice fluctuations or maybe how they walk, okay? Or making fun or asking inappropriate questions about sexual activity, okay? We don't want to know anything about somebody's sexual activity, and nor should we be asking about somebody's sexual activity, nor should we be getting into somebody's sexual activity. It's really inappropriate, and it is not for public organizational conversation, okay? Gender expression or gender identity, two different things. Gender expression is how someone expresses themselves. So this might be the clothes that they wear, okay? It might be how they style their hair. It might be how they wear makeup. It might be their mannerisms. So it's how someone chooses to express themselves. Years ago at the city of Silverton, the mayor, his name was Stu, and you have been in public service for a long time. Stu was the mayor, and he came to city council meetings in his nylons and his heels and his jewelry on. That was his expression, okay? How he expressed himself. Gender identity is how somebody feels on the inside. So you may have heard about different pronoun identity, right? Someone who uses a pronoun different than the sex, the gender of their birth. So if you are born a female, your natural pronouns are she or her, okay? A male, he, him. And the individual may say, I do not identify with the gender of my birth, so my pronouns are non-gender. They, their, them. Okay, there's a whole list of them, C, Z, them, okay? So this is where somebody says, I do not identify with the gender of my birth, and therefore I am living my life gender neutral. Some of these people will also change their name, okay? So if you have a staff member who changes their name, you change their name, okay? We don't say, oh, nope, sorry, in our system, your legal name is the only thing that can be in the system. We change the name, okay? It's actually illegal in the state of Oregon to say, nope, sorry, not going to call you the name that you have given yourself or that you've changed your name to, or I'm sorry, I just can't get on board with all of these different pronouns. It's just all interesting to me, and I just can't get on board with that. So I'm just gonna call you the way I call you. Okay? Potentially, this could be harassment, right? The other thing about gender expression that I want to say is in society, we have been raised in a society where we've been taught that there's only two genders. And so we see evidence of that throughout society. If you go into a store to buy clothes, you see the girls' clothes on one side of the store. Well, we have most of the store. And then over here is the men's department, and you get just this bound over here, okay? I mean, that's what society has taught us. through the years is that we have males and we have females, and males look a certain way and females look a certain way. So when you have someone who is not conforming to society, it may make some people uncomfortable, and then people go kind of to their shield and they're like, well, this is uncomfortable for me, okay? So I'm having a hard time with this. We have a legal obligation to treat everyone with dignity and respect, and to treat them with how they view themselves, both in employment and in the public. So when you're looking at, as a city council, you're charged with passing a lot of things. You probably have comp plans, transportation plans, okay? So looking at your plans that you're passing, you know, are we treating our public equally as we are passing things? What verbiage are we using, right? So things to start to think about. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about sexual harassment. So oftentimes when I say that we're going to talk about harassment, this is exactly what everybody thinks the whole class is all about, is sexual harassment. The funny thing, I've been doing HR for 35 years, and I've been talking about sexual harassment since about 1991, when we had the Anita Hill hearing, when Clarence Thomas was put on the bench, and Anita Hill, you know, one of the first times was very public. You know, we never saw that before, and we certainly didn't see it televised. And then all of a sudden, 1991, all of those in HR start training on this. And what we trained about was quid pro quo sexual harassment, which was the management or the person of power having that power over the subordinate. Okay, so quid pro quo sexual harassment is the person of power saying something like, you know, you get to keep your job, or I'll give you a bonus, or I'll give you a raise if you give me some kind of sexual favor, okay? So it's a this for that, a quid pro quo. When I talked before about hostile work environment, and I said oftentimes there needs to be more than one incident, okay, this is a time that we don't need multiple incidents, okay? This is one time. One time can get us in trouble here, okay? So sexual harassment we take very, very seriously. One can be enough. The thing again about sexual harassment is it all depends on our view of sexual harassment. Let's get the next slide up. So sexual harassment can be a hostile work environment if someone is trying to advance a sexual favor to someone or ask for a sexual favor, okay? Again, if you are the person of power, it can become sexual harassment very quickly because the person of power in that quid pro quo scenario and the subordinate, okay? Subordinate feels like they need to oblige the person of power, okay? But it doesn't have to just be the quid pro quo situation. It can be coworker to coworker. Funny thing, during this pandemic, when we thought everybody was working at home, well, we had a lot of people working in offices, and I'm not sure what's been going on with the pictures on the cell phones. Pictures, 1,000 words there. Take a picture of yourself, send it to a coworker. We have sexual harassment. And for some reason, at CIS, we've had a lot of cases lately where people have been taking pictures of themselves and sending it to a coworker, thinking they're funny or whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but taking a picture and sending it, whether it's on a city phone, your personal phone, to a coworker, and it's sexual in nature, sexual harassment. Yes, you wouldn't believe. And these all, of course, get investigated immediately. And I'm just going to let you all know these are pictures that we really don't want to see. Okay? But it can be, again, female to male. We have females sending the pictures to males. It can be male to female. It can be same gender. And it has nothing to do with being sexually attracted to someone. Some people just think they're funny. Okay? Some people just think they're funny. So we have to remember that any kind of unwanted conduct in a sexual way can become sexual harassment. Again, it's not the person who gets to decide who's delivering the message, it's the person receiving the message. That's the person that's deciding if what just happened is uncomfortable or has just crossed the line. The receiver. And then, of course, the person who did the contract, I don't think I've ever sat with an employee, especially in an investigation, and they told me, oh, Sharon, you know, I was just goofing off, I was just kidding around, I didn't really mean anything. And when I said, okay, well then let's just go back to work, it's like, no, we have a complaint, and we actually have to investigate and take a look at this. So these are very, very serious situations. But again, oftentimes it's the person doing it that says, I didn't mean it, they took it out of context. And so what we just have to remember is because we are all different people, because we are all unique, we have to be very careful with the message that we deliver. And if it could potentially be outside of the professional boundaries of work, we have to be careful of how the content might be received. And especially if it's around the lines of sexual or racial, what did I say? How could it be construed by somebody else? And have I just crossed the line? The other thing we have to remember about this, again, is we know different generations view sexual harassment very differently. There was a study done amongst public workers, I think it was at the federal level, where there was all sorts of questions that said, you know, is this sexual harassment? And we had the younger generation, the Z generation, marked all of them. Yes, they were all sexual harassment. And we had the baby boomers and the traditionalists that marked like 4 of them. And they're like, you know, I don't think so. So we don't all see it the same way. If we did, this would be so much easier to tackle, but we don't. So again, always having to put in play, how could somebody else receive my conduct? Okay, next. Yeah, different people view things differently. Oh, the Me Too movement. You know, funny thing about that Me Too movement, it got people talking. So one thing about that generation, bringing up the Me Too movement, some people said, hey, that happened 7, 10, 15 years ago. Why are you bringing this up now? Or how could somebody bring that up now? Well, it's because if you are the victim, many people don't speak up. They can't speak up. They're afraid to speak up. Okay? They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid of losing their job, etc. Okay? So actually, Oregon law changed their harassment law as of 2020, and now we have a 5-year statute of limitations on this kind of conduct instead of 1. So somebody, now, do you remember what you had for breakfast 3 days ago? Maybe some of you remember, some of you don't. Are you going to remember what conduct happened 2, 3, 4 years ago? Okay, the claim comes in 5 years. Yeah, we got to defend ourselves. We have to remember what conduct happened. So again, if we go back to, I don't even know what I did. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. This is getting farther and farther out there. So again, have to remember when we have our hat on, especially for you city councilors, staff will talk about it tomorrow. When you're wearing your hat, you have to remember, how are you being perceived? Have we crossed the line? The fact of the matter is, if you're working with city staff, if you're working as a member of the council, you're talking about city business, your hat's on. Pretty hard to take the hat off, okay? Pretty hard to take the hat off. So we have to remember how our conduct is being viewed. Next question. Okay, yellow light. Is yellow light behavior okay? Next slide. So I put a slide on bullying in here because bullying, again, is very generational. Some of the older generations are like, bullying, you know, just toughen up. I mean, people are so sensitive today, you know. I mean, you know, when I started my career, people were very aggressive, and now everybody's so sensitive anymore. Well, the fact of the matter is, again, how we perceive conduct. So bullying behavior could be supervisor to an employee, but it can also be employee to an employee. So it's usually repeated, unwanted actions, okay? Sometimes it's a group of people directed at one person. Sometimes it's a person directed just at one person, okay? Doesn't always have to be a group. Sometimes the reason for the action is that there's some intent there. They want to humiliate the person. They want to intimidate the person. Sometimes it's because we're anxious about that person. Maybe the person's doing really, really well in the job, and now we're threatened by them, because they might get the promotion and you might not get the promotion, and so people start to bully people. When I ask about bullying, especially when we talk with staff, I ask people, have you ever participated in bullying behavior? And most people go, oh, no, I would never bully anyone. I'm like, oh, ever had water talk and throw a coworker under the bus? Well, it's just kind of water talk, cooler talk. That's a form of bullying. If we are trying to cut another employee down, okay, it's a form of bullying. Why are we having this conversation? Who are we having this conversation with? What's the context of the conversation? What's the why of the conversation? So bullying is, when I think about bullying, when we started to add this to the training, I thought about junior high, and the big kid that was always in the characters in the comics about being the bully. No, bully can be anybody. The bully can be anybody. Next step. Let's load that up. Go ahead, yeah, there you go. So, bias. So, we all have bias, okay? How our brain works, okay? We have positive and negative bias, or affirmative and negative bias, okay? Bias helps us make decisions, right? So when you were a young child, you were raised in your household, and by conversations that happened in your household, you formed opinion, right? You didn't really think about the opinion you're forming, you just formed opinion based on how your parents raised you, okay? So in that opinion, you have formed a bias. Biases help us navigate life. We know what we like and we know what we don't like, right? That's bias, okay? Again, it helps us make decisions. So bias can be very, very good. Bias can be bad when we are using our bias in a negative way in employment, okay? If we don't like someone, so we don't want to add them onto our team, or if we're doing an interview and we see the applicant for the first time and they walk in the room and we don't like the way they look, so we might have a bias against different nationalities or race, and we see somebody walk in, it's like, oh, I don't want that person on my team, okay? That's that bias. You really don't have to think about it, it just comes out, because that's your formed bias that formed when you were a child through the years, okay? So that's an unconscious bias. It happens in a split second, okay? The funny thing about the unconscious bias is it's often incompatible with conscious values that you may have. You may say that you have a conscious value of respect, that you respect everyone. But if we really get into it, do we really respect everyone? Well, people start talking about other people. It's like, well, I don't understand. I don't like people from X country, or I don't like people of that religion, or the big one now, I don't like people of that political party or that political party. So do we really respect everyone? Again, naturally, we have formed biases, okay? But again, when it comes to an employment, when it comes to being a city councilor, we have to be careful if our bias is triggering a decision that we are making. So we always check ourselves. Why are we making this decision? Is there any bias involved? Okay? Is it about someone or about something? Am I making a decision because I like that employee or I don't like that employee? And so I'm going to make an opposite decision, okay? So how are we making, especially employment decisions? Are we allowing our bias to trigger a positive or a negative response? So microaggressions. So this is I think you've started to hear about microaggressions, very popular now. All these buzzwords, right? And microaggressions is what we're talking about. So what is it? Well, it's basically everyday verbal or nonverbal slights, snubs, insults, and it communicates a hostile or derogatory message, okay, from a non-marginalized or a dominant group in society towards someone who is marginalized, okay, a group of people, an individual who is marginalized, again, because of who they are. So, just saying, in society, in Oregon, just Oregon data, is, we're 87, almost 88% white in the state of Oregon. if I looked at your county, you're got probably close to those numbers as well, pretty high, okay? That's just Oregon. So if you are white, you're the majority in Oregon. So you're not marginalized because you're the majority, okay? So certain things don't affect you certain ways if you're white. So if you make a comment about a group that is marginalized, so the group that's in the minority, there's a lot of weight to that conversation or to that statement, just again because of who you are, okay? So, next slide. So to help people kind of understand this definition of microaggression, I've changed it to subtle acts of exclusion because I think it helps people get their arms around it a little bit better. So they're usually very subtle comments or actions. Most people aren't thinking about what they're saying or doing. It just kind of happens, okay? It can be something that you say or do. But that statement or action can be very exclusive if you're on the receiving end, okay? But again, the person saying it is like, well, what was the big deal? I mean, it wasn't that bad, you know? It's like, I'm just talking in general. This is, again, where we talk especially very general about someone. So next slide, here's some examples for you. Everyone knows Asians are smart. So this example comes from Bend, where I live over in Central Oregon. Drove over by hers this morning to get here. 90 degrees in Eugene. It was very comfortable once I hit the 60-something. Woo! So, in Bend, we have 3 high schools. Bend High, Summit, and Mountain View. And in 2019, they didn't do it last year because of COVID, and they didn't do it again this year, but they always interview the valedictorians of the high schools at the, one of the TV stations. And in 2019, the valedictorian from Summit High School is Asian. And this person's interviewing them, and like, you know, of course, usually the interview's about where you're going, you know, what you're gonna be in life, et cetera, et cetera. And this young lady started to talk about the microaggressions that happened at the high school, about how her friends and fellow students would say things to her like, well, of course you're the valedictorian. You're Asian, and everyone knows Asians are smart. You got the smart brain. You know, I'm white. I had to really study hard at microbiology, et cetera, you know, AP physics. It probably just came natural to you because you're Asian, okay? That's a microaggression, okay? If you're white and you're not Asian and you make a comment about Asians as a group, again, an individual might say, what's the big deal? Well, you've marginalized a group of people. You've put them into a bucket. Here's the next one. The girls in the office. I get this one all the time. The girls in the office. Okay. The girls, what's the definition of a girl? Someone under the age of 18, a minor. Yeah, that's a girl. Okay. Once you're over 18, not a little girl anymore. Okay. But very common do I hear the comments of, go talk to the girls in the office. It deminimizes their professionalism. Okay. I don't care what your role is at the city of North Bend. We're all professionals at what we do, and no one should be marginalized, okay? Now, I hear in comparison to this, a lot of people will say, well, Sharon, I hear everybody say, go talk to the guys, okay? Guys, believe it or not, this may not seem fair, is acceptable because it's actually been adopted as a unisex term. People are saying guys for both guys and gals. So they're saying guys in a general statement, okay? If a man, an older man or a man says, go talk to the girls, here's your majority, okay? Here's the minority. It deminimizes that group of individuals. But this is probably one of the most common ones I hear. And then people are like, oh, I think I say that. Okay, sure. Many of us say microaggressions. So this is to start saying, oh, do I say that? And who am I saying it to? And gee, now that I know, maybe I pay attention to that. Maybe I didn't realize what was being said, because that's the whole idea about microaggressions, is to help people identify what they are. And if you're saying it, how do we help fix it? How do we get something else stuck in your brain instead of a microaggression? So here's the next one. Slimy. Slang gets us in trouble. So slang happens out there in society, okay? You start hearing slang going on, and at some point we adopt it. It comes in one ear and it starts coming out our mouth. And we don't know why we picked it up. Over in Bend, I don't know for how many years it was, it's all good. I think I heard it's all good at every store, everything you went into. It was like, oh, it's all good. No worries. It's all good. That was constant, okay? I don't care where you went. Wasn't that many years ago that the slang, oh, that's so gay, was very popular. Anybody remember that expression? Oh, that's so gay. Yeah, it was, again, it was very, very fluid conversation, and people would use that expression. When you used that expression, you were using it in a, oh, that's so gay. If you took gay out and you put a different word in, it would be, oh, that's so gross. Oh, that's so yucky. That's how we used, oh, that's so gay. It wasn't used in a positive way. It was in a, ugh, icky way. So, imagine being gay. If you're saying, oh, that's so gay, you're probably not gay, right? I mean, again, we often don't use microaggressions if they affect us. We use microaggressions that affect a different group of people, and usually a group that is marginalized, okay, that is in the minority. So, next slide. So, when we think about microaggressions, when we think about bias, when we think about yellow light conduct, we all do it, none of us are perfect. Our job is to help each other when we hear someone say something that could be microaggression, or if our unconscious bias is coming out in a negative way that can affect an employee's, especially employment relationship, whether it be hiring, firing, discipline, etc., we need to help each other, because none of us are perfect, and our job is to say, do you realize what you just said? Can I help you with that? Are you aware? Are you aware that the decision might have some undertone? Are you aware that comment could be construed different? We have an obligation to help each other, because again, we're all different. And we may be coming from a mindset that says, what's the big deal? Okay? What's the big deal? It's not that big of a deal. It is for the receiver. Okay? And we don't get to decide how the receiver receives our comments and our expressions. Okay? So our policies, very important, even for council. You should know what the discrimination harassment policies are at the City of Bend. Funny thing about every time the Oregon is in the legislature, new employment laws happen over and over and over again. We've got new ones coming up here. In fact, there's a new one that just passed about hairstyles, okay? Yeah, no more discriminating against people's hairstyles, okay? So there's 3 or 4 of them that are coming up. In 2020, Oregon passed a new pregnancy disability law, passed a new harassment law, like I said, now 5 years statute of limitations instead of 1. So, council, you also need to be aware of these policies, because an employee has the right to go to whoever they feel comfortable with to bring a claim forward. Now, council, if a member of staff comes to you, you take it to the city manager, okay? Because again, you need to funnel through the city manager. If it's the city manager, well, then it comes to the council, because that's your boss, and I'm assuming you will then work with your city attorney. Are you the city attorney?
I am.
All right, there she is, right there. Next slide. So, this is the Workplace Protection Act of January 2020. It expanded the law for harassment. Okay, again, from 1 year to 5 years. We have to be very careful, and anytime somebody brings a potential claim, of course, claims aren't right away, somebody brings a complaint forward, we have a legal obligation to investigate, right? We don't get to decide. This is when we don't let our bias come in and say, oh, that's just Stan, you know, that's just who he is, you know, don't worry about it, he's just rough around the edges. No, we don't get to do that. Or we don't get to say, oh, you know, I don't really think that's harassment, we'll let it go because it didn't hit these marks. No, we have an obligation to investigate the conduct. Next slide. So, yes, the complaint comes in, comes to the city manager, comes to HR, comes to the city attorney. If it comes to council, take it to the city manager, okay? We do not want you deliberating amongst yourselves about this, so these are things that we don't want you to share. We want, oh, yeah, we need to take you over here, okay? That's where we want that comment to go, okay? Because we don't want for it to get out. We have to investigate, right? And investigation is not your role. That's gonna come over here, okay? So, city, of course, is going to take all these very seriously. They're going to interview, they're going to investigate, they're going to talk to people. They are going to get any kind of documents that are needed to be collected. Sometimes that's where those pictures come in handy, on phones or any kind of emails, etc. The content is going to come in, and then there will be a decision. There will be a written decision, okay? And the decision is going to be, of course, based on what we learn, but the result is going to be, again, what we have learned. And the law says, employer, you have a legal obligation to make sure your work environment is free from any kind of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. So if we find this, we must tackle this. And we must bring the appropriate discipline down. For some people, or for some actions, what we learn, that conduct may be a warning. For some people, it may be firing that person. This can be very difficult, especially if it's that employee that you really, really like or you really, really need. And then that's when we start making concessions. We start saying, oh, well, you know, maybe it wasn't as bad as we really think it is. You know, we really need that employee. It's when we start making concessions. But the law says, employer, we need to make sure this never happens again. And so, again, for some situations, it may be a firing offense. Click. So, use an elected official, okay? We need to be familiar with the fact that we have all of these different categories. We have race, we have religion. Talking with these things on for a long time. Excuse me, I apologize. We have race, we have religion, we have sexual orientation, we have gender, we have national orientation, we have pregnancy, we have all these protected classes, okay? So as an elected official, you need to know that, again, if somebody comes to you and is saying, this has happened to me, or this conduct, we need to take it seriously. And we do not say, oh, that's just Stan, oh, that's just Mary, they're so sensitive, or it's not that big of a deal, or, you know, we've heard about this conduct before and it didn't go anywhere. I've heard that one a number of times. Oh, we had something similar to this and it didn't go anywhere. Well, every situation is different, so we must investigate, okay? So we have to know when a concern is coming to us, what we do with it. Under that 2020 rule, that 2020 law, every employer must identify at least 2 individuals who are trained to receive complaints. So usually, it's the city manager and HR. We don't want to name names in our policy, but we do want to name positions. That doesn't mean those are the only positions city staff can go to. City staff may still go to any supervisor or manager that they feel comfortable with. But before the 2020 version, it was go to any supervisor and manager, and so staff was going to supervisors or managers, and that supervisor or manager was like, they didn't know that they were receiving a complaint, and so they weren't doing anything with it. And so things were not being investigated. So Oregon comes out and says, okay, still can go to any supervisor or manager, but at least 2 people in the organization need to know how to at least receive the complaint and then make sure it moves forward. Okay, so we often think things are just rumors. We have a legal obligation to address it. Next slide. Okay. Especially for you, City Council, confidentiality is critical, okay? We have an obligation to keep these things Confidential, personnel matters are confidential. People say, well, everything the employee does is public. Not quite. There are certain things in an employee's personnel file that is public. However, certain things are not public. And certainly, when we are in the middle of investigating a concern or a potential complaint, we need to make sure that we are treating everybody with dignity and respect and that we are keeping it confidential. So again, counselors, remember that you've got your hat on as a city councilor and direct any concerns that you receive to the city manager. We do not want the foot and mouth consequence. Okay? Next slide. Yeah. Okay. Quickly, these are how, again, city councilors can get in trouble. Okay? Using, obviously, your office for personal gain is a no-no, actually, for any public employee. Using their position for personal gain is inappropriate. Using tools of the city that they don't personally own at home is inappropriate. You can't use the city pickup truck to go get your personal mark desk to take it to your house because you don't have a pickup, right? City councilors, you too. You can't be directing staff to do something on your behalf, right? You can't tell the public works guy to go get that pickup truck and while they're going back to the yard, swing by and dump some stuff at your house because you don't have a pickup truck. Can't be doing that, right? That should say city policies, not county policies. Fail to follow, of course, city policies. Of course, meeting laws. Making sure that you are following your charter and your council meeting laws. Employment decisions. Again, you have one employee, right? Are you an employee or are you on contract?
We're contracted.
You're on contract. So your one employee is the city manager, right? Yeah, that's your employee. So you don't get to make other employment decisions. Now, for certain department head positions, sometimes council like to give their 2 cents. But again, you have one employee and the rest of the employees report to the city manager. So again, it seems like it's such a simple tree, but it can get so convoluted, right? And again, I think it's because a lot of people, we've known each other for so long and we have relationships with people. Or, you have all these commissions and committees. And so, certain staff you probably work with more, especially like when you get to planning commission meetings and might work more with the planning department. So we get familiar and comfortable. And then it's kind of easy to skirt around and say, oh, I just had a question. Or, I know this person who would be great for this job. And so I know you have an opening on your team. How can I help that person get a job? Okay, we have to be careful that we are not allowing that to happen because remember, you have to have your city council hat on. Okay. So, common claims against public officials, more of this. So this is where I'm going to bring this hostile work environment back out, okay? Again, in order for something to be a hostile work environment, an action to the individual, to the employee, has to be based on, I am being treated different, I am in a hostile work environment because of my age. Things are being said about me that is keeping me from doing my job well because of my age, because of my religion, because of my sex, because of my gender, because of my national origin, okay? For it to be legal hostile work environment, okay? This is happening to me because of my protected class, okay? Council, you can create a hostile work environment for an employee if you are crossing the line and going directly to staff. This happens when we have city councilors in a city council meeting, in a workshop, complain about staff, okay? Where they want to direct the traffic, okay, about a department, or they don't like what a department head is doing, and they want to make sure that gets done, and so they blurt that out in a council meeting or a workshop, okay? It's crossing the line. Now, what you might tell the city manager is, I have a concern about something, blah, blah, blah. That's up to the city manager then to tackle that, okay? So you don't get to direct traffic at the city council level. goes to the city manager, and the city manager will take a look at that. Okay, yeah, professional conduct. I like to say this is everything that we learned in kindergarten, how to play well in the sandbox. You know, back in those days when we teach our children, you know, to play nice and be respectful, and then we all grow up. And we learn those very simple rules that we all learned as children, which is to play nice. So the goal, of course, of our work environment starts and ends with our employees. Starts and ends with the culture that we create. And every single day that we come to work, we bring ourselves to work, we bring our biases, we bring our pros and our cons and how we view the world, and we bring ourselves to work. And so every day we create our work environment. You know, I hear people say, oh, we put the goals up on, or we have a mission statement, we put all these things up on our walls, and that's all great. But that doesn't create your culture. What creates our culture is what we say and do every single day. Who we act with, who we interact with, what are we talking about, right? That's how we create our culture. So a good culture starts and ends every single day with what our employees care about. They care about being able to come to work and work in an environment that's free from harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. That's what we want. That's how we get our job done, right? That's what we want. That's what we all want. So, next slide. I think it's just my contact information. Again, you got the Cliff Note version. Staff gets to our version tomorrow. We go into much more depth. So, with that, because I know you have a lot on your agenda, is there anything I did not cover, or something I covered that you have questions you'd like me to go a little bit deeper? Because again, you've got the high level version that you would like to ask, or if you said, boy, I really wish she would have covered X. She didn't at all, she missed it.
Counselor, is there any specific questions that you had for her or wanted her to expand on any examples?
Anything confusing? Probably some stuff you don't like. I always get that. Again, it's where we sit. It's what our experience in life are. It's our views. I know for some people, some of the content is like, oh, it just went right past me. And now there's all this stuff that I have to remember. If I'm going to be a manager, or if I'm going to be a public employee or a public official, there's just so much. But it all ends up with just being respectful, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then saying, hey, if somebody says, are you aware of what you just said? No, what did I say? Well, you said this. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that that was being taken in a negative way. And or we're just people. So we just help each other. But then be open to that, right? Being open to that. That's going to help.
I think it's important to, understand when you're elected, things change.
Yeah.
And the things that you could do as a private citizen, it's different now when you're in an elected position because of that, as you mentioned, like the position, whether it's power or perceived power, and who you contact and the relationship. So that might be probably what the steepest learning curve is. Yeah.
I had a mayor once who was very grumpy with it was a member of the police department, and well, it was in the days where you actually went around and put tickets on windows for parking, and the mayor just hated the fact that his car was getting tickets, and he's like, well, I shouldn't get a ticket, I'm the mayor, I should be able to park where I want to park. And so he went to the police chief, and he wanted that employee fired. Number one, it was a female, and number two, she's putting tickets on my car, and I want all those removed. It was like, and the poor police chief was like, no, but again, we forget sometimes our hat, and, we run for public office because we want to do good for our public, but then we have to remember sometimes if we are letting that get in front of us, and if that's, we've crossed the line with what we're saying and doing, and we just have to refocus and take our step back. and remember.
I know that, you know, in the last year or so, we have plexiglass between us, and so it's different, but I'm a very extroverted person in the way that I talk, and I'm a leaner inner. I like to get close, and will reach out and touch people on the shoulder, and that is, again, knowing what the role is, the interaction that I have now in my position is different, and so the way that I interact with some of my friends, I need to have a self-check, and I don't know if that's something that you can, any advice on that, or how to move forward?
Yes, oh, in the staff version, we talk about that. You know, what's red light, yellow light, green light to all of us, and so I ask in the staff version, giving somebody a hug on a bad day, you know, is that okay? And all my huggers are like, yes, you know, and I'm like, well, you might be a hugger. I'm a hugger. I'm a green light person. I'm like, I want to make people feel better, you know? And so if somebody's having a bad day, you know, can I give you a hug? And if they say, okay, then professional, we call it 1-1000. And that's it. Okay?
Okay, so it is okay, you can ask.
We ask, can I give you a hug? And if they're like, okay, 1-1000, it's just kind of a embrace like this. We leave 2,000, 3,000 for family, right? No, if they're releasing, you releasing, no, God, bring them in, right? We don't go there, okay? If they say no, it's no.
Yeah.
So again, for the huggers, it's all about us. We think somebody needs our hug because then you will feel so much better. If somebody's like, no, then we don't touch them. Here's the things us huggers do. We didn't want to pat you on the hand or pat you on the shoulder. We still want to make bodily contact, and they don't want to be touched.
Right.
Or maybe they want to be touched by you. For some people, that's, you know, it's kind of, I don't want my boss hugging me, or I don't want that person hugging me, right? So it's about the receiver. We need to ask, but again, it's so, for the hugger, they just think that it's okay because that's what's comfortable for them. And touching them might not be okay.
I even find, you know, like all the things that are post-COVID, asking permission to shake hands, and, you know, is there any suggestions on like that, or like, are we elbow bumping, or because it is part of our culture that got like immediately stopped, and it'll be interesting to see how that's reintroduced.
That's really interesting. At CIS, we were in a team meeting, my team, and we were talking about this thing, about how handshakes have been part of our society. It meant professionalism, you know, for years and years and years. And now everybody like, are we going to keep elbow bumping for the rest? And some people are like, no, I just think it's going to go away. Some people are saying you'll just come in a room and say hello, and you won't, even doing this thing, that we won't go back to handshaking. Which again is going to be very hard for some people because it has been such part of who we are, especially professionalism. You come in, firm handshake, right? We all taught firm handshake. Well, I don't know if we're ever going to go back to handshake. So you're right, this whole COVID thing has altered how we relate to people, how we communicate to people, how close we get to people, okay? And now we've been told to stand away, get back. And it's really affecting people's communication style. So then I think some people are like, once the masks come off, once the 6 feet, I'm gonna get right back in there. And some people might be saying, hey, I still want you backing up. Definitely has affected how we communicate. And for some people it's hard. Again, you get that people who wants to be close. That's how they communicate, so it's tough.
Well, before we move on, was there any other questions or clarifications while we have Sharon here? And so the best way, what we see, have your contact information, but again, we talked a lot about protocols and information. Is that still running things through the city administrator and the our city attorney, or what is the best way if we have some questions?
Sure. So if you have a question about this content, you know, this is for you, and so I think it's okay if you contact me directly. Now, if you contact me about your own scenario, I'm going to say, oh, we need to go back through this process. If you're just saying, could you explain this a little bit more to me? I'm happy to explain more about this context, okay? But if you want to ask me to see if you have a scenario or this happened, I'm going to direct you right back through this process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we really appreciate your time and all the things that you do for the cities.
Yeah.
And if there isn't any further questions, then I think we'll move on the agenda.
Very good.
And
Thank you
again,
so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.